This is one of Australia's state borders. And so's this. Here's another. But there are calls for this one to move. Australia's internal borders haven't changed in over 100 years. But now this border between New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory presents a potential problem. It's partly because Australia is suffering one of the world's worst housing crises, and because this really straight borderline doesn't reflect the reality of the landscape around it.
This is very uncommon and really hasn't been seen other than some minor realignments. So this is really the first substantive change since Federation.
Think of Hong Kong or New York. These cities have expanded up because there's not really anywhere else to go. But Australia isn't short on space. Our cities have expanded further and further out in a phenomenon known as urban sprawl. And that includes Australia's capital, Canberra.
Canberra's proving to be a really popular place to live, so we need to build more housing. Canberra is Australia's cool little capital.
Built in the Australian Capital Territory as the centre of power between Sydney and Melbourne, Canberra's population of about 460,000 residents is forecast to reach almost 800,000 by 2060, with the highest growth projected in the north, right at the New South Wales border. One of the city's proposed housing developments will deliver 11,500 much-needed homes.
Ginninderry is probably one of the first large-scale urban developments that will cross a border for some time, and so having a border run through the middle leads to some interesting quandaries.
So residents living in the same neighbourhood could be subject to completely different healthcare and education systems, even different laws. And if Australia ever closed its internal borders, as happened during the COVID pandemic, there's a risk neighbours could be cut off from each other entirely. Perhaps all of this may have been avoided if whoever drew the borders of the ACT in 1910 hadn't drawn this oddly straight line.
Clearly the border at the moment, somewhat arbitrary in that it doesn't follow the rest of the pattern of the ACT border, which was very much driven by access to water and water catchments.
Without redrawing the map, this part of the development would be cut off from the rest of New South Wales, effectively becoming an island between this river, this creek, and the border.
It would be a very odd set of service provision, because again all those New South Wales services could only access the area by coming through the ACT.
Even the head of the local council on the New South Wales side agrees that handing over the land is probably the best option.
The rate revenue that would be generated from that area would not be sufficient to be able to cater for maintaining the assets and the services to an ACT standard.
The New South Wales government wants to crunch the numbers before it agrees to any change, and the federal government would need to agree too.
How this actually happens is a little bit on the fly in the sense of figuring this out, but it is within our constitution.